All right, so are you ready to dive into a case that really shook this quiet community? It was a crime so random, so violent, that it left everyone wondering, how could this happen here?
Yeah, you know what makes this case so unsettling? It challenges our understanding of how crimes usually work.
Yeah.
We often hear about escalation, a
Right.
pattern of behavior that starts small and then gets worse over time.
Right.
But here the violence just explodes out of nowhere.
Yeah. It's almost like a nightmare you wouldn't expect in a place where everyone thought they knew their neighbors.
Exactly.
The victim, Nancy Woodrum, 62 years old, a hairdresser, a devout Jehovah's Witness,
Hmm.
and by all accounts, just a truly kind person known for helping others.
Right.
In fact, the sources describe how she even brought tamales to the man who would later become her murderer.
It's just a detail that highlights how unexpected this whole thing was.
Right.
It just makes you realize that appearances can be deceiving, and you never really know what's beneath the surface.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's May 5th, 2018, in a quiet county where Nancy lived on a property with multiple homes,
Okay.
and that weekend, one of them was being used for a wedding party.
Oh, wow.
So imagine the shock when her daughter and a neighbor went to check on her and stumbled onto the scene straight out of a horror movie.
So what did they find?
Well, the sources describe blood on the bedding,
Oh my God.
a missing bedspread, signs of a struggle outside the home, and most disturbingly, Nancy was nowhere to be found.
So you have this festive atmosphere with a wedding celebration going on, and then suddenly this chilling disappearance.
Right.
Must have been terrifying.
Absolutely, and for the lead investigator, Detective Clint Cole, this was a unique challenge.
Yeah.
A missing person, no immediate leads, a potential crime scene with no body, and a large pool of potential suspects because of the wedding.
Wow, a lot of people to talk to.
Talk about a logistical nightmare, this
Right.
chaotic scene with people coming and going,
Right.
heightened emotions, and the clock is ticking. And to make things even more complex, Nancy's son refused to cooperate with the investigation.
Really?
Yeah, the sources mentioned that he wouldn't provide a DNA sample or answer any questions.
Oh, that's suspicious.
Right. You have to wonder, is it grief? Is it shock? Or is there something more going on?
Yeah, big red flag for sure.
So despite these challenges, the investigation moved forward meticulously.
Okay.
Cole and his team used every resource they had. Canines, helicopters, extensive searches.
Wow.
They were determined to find Nancy, no matter how difficult it became.
They didn't give up.
Not at all. And this is where the investigation takes a fascinating turn.
Oh, really? What happened?
Technology.
Oh, okay.
They used a Google geofence warrant.
Okay, I've heard of that, but it was still relatively new at the time, right?
It was, and it played a crucial role in this case.
So for our listeners who might not know, can you explain how a geofence warrant works?
Think of it like a virtual net cast around Nancy's property. It allowed investigators to get data from any cell phone that crossed that boundary during a specific time.
So they could see who was near the crime scene when she disappeared.
Exactly.
That's pretty ingenious.
It is, but it also raises some privacy concerns.
For sure, it's still debated in legal circles.
It is, but in this case, it proved crucial.
Yeah, so who did this digital dragnet lead them to?
Well, this is where it gets really shocking, because it led them to a familiar face, Carlo Flores.
Wait a minute, Carla Flores, the painter who worked on Nancy's property,
One and the same.
the one who chatted with her about the Bible,
That's the one.
shared meals with her, seems so kind and approachable.
I know it's a detail that just chills you to the bone.
Yeah.
It shows how appearances can be so deceiving.
So what did they do next? Did they confront him right away?
Well, they needed more than just the geofence data to tie him to the scene.
Right. They needed hard evidence.
Remember that blood they found?
Uh-huh.
Well, that's where forensic science comes in.
The DNA match.
That's the aha moment.
Right.
The one where the investigation shifts from finding Nancy to figuring out what Carlo did.
Yeah.
The DNA confirmed that the blood belonged to Flores, placing him at the scene and making him the prime suspect.
But they still didn't know where Nancy was.
Right, that was the big question.
Was she alive? Was she hurt?
The uncertainty must have been agonizing for everyone.
So what did the investigators do next?
They made a strategic decision.
What was that?
Instead of immediately grilling Flores,
Okay.
they chose to focus on finding Nancy.
That's a risky move
It was, but it was driven by compassion.
for the victim and her family.
They understood the human cost of this crime and wanted to bring closure to Nancy's loved ones.
So how did they approach Flores?
They played it cool, invited him to the station for a chat,
A casual chat.
starting with small talk about golf, his family, anything but Nancy.
So to get him to relax
Exactly.
before they drop the bomb.
Classic interrogation tactic, make him feel comfortable, and then bam.
Did it work?
It
It
did.
confessed.
For a while, he denied any involvement.
Uh-huh.
But as they started presenting the evidence,
Yeah.
the cracks in his facade began to show.
We're going to have to pause there, but don't worry, we're just getting started.
When we come back, we'll delve deeper into Flores' confession,
Okay.
the chilling details of the crime,
Yeah.
and the lasting impact this case has had on everyone involved.
I can't wait. I mean, the phone records, the DNA, it all pointed to him.
Right.
And Flores knew he couldn't keep lying.
Yeah.
He started fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, all the classic signs.
Yeah, it's amazing how even when someone's trying to act innocent, their body language gives them away.
Exactly. And experienced investigators like Detective Cole,
Right.
they know how to read those signs.
Yeah.
They know how to apply just enough pressure
Right.
to get a suspect to break.
So what finally made him confess?
It was a combination of things, the evidence, the interrogation tactics. But maybe there was also a little bit of guilt,
Right.
a part of him that couldn't handle the lies anymore.
It's interesting to think that even someone capable of such a horrible act might still have a conscience.
Yeah. The human mind is a strange thing.
So in Flores' case,
Yeah.
his confession wasn't a full outpouring of remorse.
No.
He was more calculated.
It was a way to control the narrative.
So he admitted to the crime, but held back on certain details.
Exactly. It's something you see sometimes, especially in cases involving sexual assault.
Oh, really?
Like there's a line they're not willing to cross.
Even when confessing to such a terrible crime.
Yeah, maybe it's shame, maybe a misguided attempt to save face, or maybe just a way to minimize the consequences.
So what did he reveal? What information did he give them?
The most crucial thing he gave them was the location of Nancy's body.
Okay.
He led them to a remote area
Uh-huh.
and described how he covered her with tumbleweeds in this really matter-of-fact way.
It's like he was taking pride in some bizarre act of respect.
Yeah, it's disturbing.
So what was it like when they found her?
Heartbreaking, the relief of finding her was totally overshadowed by the reality of what had happened.
Yeah.
It was a reminder of the terrible loss for Nancy's family and friends.
And for the investigators, finding her body must have been crucial for building the case.
Oh, absolutely. They finally had the physical evidence to back up the confession.
Right.
They pressed him for more details.
And did he finally confess to everything?
He admitted to entering Nancy's house to rape her.
Oh, gosh.
He talked about the struggle, the punch that probably caused the bloodstains, and the moment he realized he had to kill her.
But even then, he didn't tell him everything.
No, he still held back some details.
It's hard to imagine the anguish for Nancy's family.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon.
Really.
It's just another example of how perpetrators try to justify their actions even when they're clearly guilty.
So what happened to Flores? Did he face justice?
He did. The evidence was overwhelming. The DNA, the cell phone data, the confession.
Right.
He waived his right to a jury trial and was found guilty of first-degree murder.
So what was the sentence?
Because of the burglary and the sexual assault, he was given life in prison without parole.
Wow. That brings us to the end of part 2.
Okay.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. Life in prison. No chance of parole.
Mm-hmm.
It's something, knowing he can't hurt anyone else,
Right.
but it doesn't erase the pain for Nancy's family.
Not at all. The sources really show how much this crime affected everyone.
Yeah.
Nancy's daughter talked about the feeling of emptiness, how it never really goes away.
Right.
She talked about how her brother, Nancy's son, was already struggling, and losing his mom in such a horrible way just made it so much worse.
Yeah.
And then there are Nancy's grandkids. As they grow up,
Yeah.
they'll have to learn about how their grandmother died.
It's heartbreaking, this ripple effect that just keeps going.
It reminds you that these cases aren't just headlines.
Right.
They're real people, real families whose lives are changed forever.
And this case also revealed some disturbing things about Flores.
Definitely, there's this huge contrast between who he seemed to be and what he was really like.
The nice guy, the family man, the churchgoer.
Exactly. He even talked about faith with Nancy,
I know.
which makes it even creepier.
Yeah.
But underneath it all
Yeah.
was this dark side.
Right.
Investigators found searches about older women
Oh, wow.
and videos of him with other women.
It paints a very different picture.
Much darker than anyone imagined.
It's a reminder that you can't always judge a book by its cover.
Absolutely.
So are you saying we miss warning signs?
It's tough to say. There's no easy answer.
Right.
This case shows how hard it is to predict who will become violent.
Yeah.
But maybe we can learn to recognize subtle signs of trouble.
Like what?
Changes in behavior, withdrawing from people, maybe even being fascinated by violence online.
Right.
These aren't guarantees,
Yeah,
but they could be starting points for getting someone help.
that's a good point.
We all have a part to play, not just in being careful,
Uh-huh.
but in being kind and supportive.
This deep dive into Nancy Woodrum's case has been quite a journey,
It has.
from the shock to the relief when Flores was caught.
Yeah,
And now this lingering sadness for Nancy and her family
right.
makes you think about the dark side of humanity
Mm-hmm.
and how hard it is to understand each other.
But there's also hope.
Yeah.
The dedication of the investigators, the technology that helped catch Flores,
Right.
and the love of Nancy's family who never gave up.
It reminds you that even in the face of evil, there's always hope, and even the most complicated mysteries can be solved, bringing some peace to those left behind.